Hi guys, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 3.5-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 19-month-old named Mia. Now today I wanted to dedicate an entire video to a topic that I am frequently asked about, and more so in the last couple of weeks. I'm not exactly sure why, but I thought that it was high time to go ahead and address what I feel like for some people is the elephant in the room when it comes to Montessori philosophy. So from one busy parent to another, today we are going to chat all about screen time in your Montessori home. So let's start off with the bottom line. What is the general Montessori stance, the perspective on screen time? Where does it fit in? And I think that the answer to that is pretty simple. If you were to go out into the community and poll a whole bunch of Montessorians, a good majority of them will come back and tell you either no screen time at all, especially if they're much younger, or they will tell you to limit screen time. And the reasoning behind that is because if you really think about it, screen time doesn't really align with the Montessori philosophy. You know, in Montessori, you're aiming for hands-on learning, tactile experiences, your child going out and discovering the world around them and using all of their senses to do that. And if you just plop a child in front of a screen and they're just sitting there passively receiving all these flashing lights and sounds and information that maybe they're not even developmentally ready for, it doesn't exactly align with what we would hope for in a Montessori environment. So that's primary reason one. The other reason is because we don't have guidelines from Dr. Montessori about how to use screens in our homes or in our classrooms, because screens didn't exist back when she was alive. And had they existed, no one really knows for sure how she would have responded. We can certainly make some educated guesses as to what she might have said. So it's kind of been left open to our interpretation of how screen time might fit in really into today's modern Montessori environments. One of my favorite Montessori mama mentors out there, Aubrey Hargest of Child of the Redwoods. I actually took her Homeschool of the Redwoods course in preparation for homeschooling Kylie this year, and it was fabulous. But that aside, she had some really incredible things to say about screen time in a Montessori environment. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea that Dr. Montessori didn't even raise her own child. Not by choice necessarily, it was more a matter of circumstances, but she didn't have the opportunity to experience parenting firsthand the way that you and I are. And so she might have had different things to say in today's modern age about screen time, knowing what all the hardships are that parents have to go through, if she really truly knew that for herself. So again, it's kind of a bit of a gray area. So knowing all of that, there are many Montessori families out there who are 100% screen-free at home. And I think that that is a very admirable endeavor. If you can make that work for your family, then I say go for it, because obviously that is most closely aligned to a true, authentic Montessori environment. However, I do know that there are many other Montessori families out there as well who do allow a little bit of screen time in their child's day. And I don't think personally that there is anything less Montessori about that. What I do think is important is how the screen time is allocated for your child to make sure that they're benefiting from the screen time that they do have, and that it's not just this free-for-all. Now, assuming that you are allowing your children to have screen time, the next question that usually pops up for most parents is, well, how much is an appropriate amount of screen time? And I don't really think that there is a cut and dry single answer to this question, because it depends on a lot of different factors. Like, nobody even really knows for sure what is an appropriate amount of screen time. There are guidelines that you can look to. For example, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends for children under the age of 18 months, absolutely no screen time at all, thanks to some of the brain research that has come out in recent years. They know that it is not good for their development, so they say no screen time under 18 months. And then from there, between 18 months and 2 years, I think they recommend screen time with the parent involved, and very, very limited. Basically to just, like, you know, FaceTime with family and friends, that kind of thing. From 2 to about 5 or 6 years old, the recommendation is then increased to 1 hour per day, and that is composed entirely of highly educational programming that has already been pre-vetted by the parent, and the parent is watching with their child whenever possible and engaging them in dialogue about what it is that they're watching and pausing the show every now and again to have that conversation. And so it's still a lot of parental involvement. That is their recommendation. From ages 6 to 10, they increase it a little bit again from 1 to 1.5 hours per day. And again, that is making sure that they're consuming media that you approve of and that you are limiting their screen time and making sure that it's not taking the place of more important things like schoolwork and general physical activity. And then from ages 11 to 13, they say up to 2 hours per day, with very similar ideas around how it should be limited. And then beyond that, I think it's basically at parental discretion and just making sure that you are working with your teenager to make sure that they are learning to be responsible users of technology. So again, those are just guidelines that have been drawn up and set forth based on what we currently know about screen time, and we don't really know all that much just yet. It's still a field that is being explored, but those are the guidelines they put together to help parents in determining what might be an appropriate amount of time for their families. Now, with that said, I think that every family has different circumstances. Every family has a different relationship with media. What one family might think is a lot of screen time, another family might think is next to nothing. And so parents have to use their own judgment and their own discretion. I am always a proponent of going with your gut as a parent. So if you feel like there is something that needs to be addressed, then there's no reason that you can't sit down with your child, have a conversation about it, and establish some new guidelines. Now, the next big question that I usually get beyond a parent deciding that they're okay with having screen time and knowing how much screen time they want to allow is then, well, how do I enforce that limit? And again, there is no black and white answer to this because it's going to depend on your child's age. It's going to depend on what your child's like social situation at home looks like, meaning whether or not like you're at home with them 24/7, or maybe they're in the care of a nanny, or they're at daycare for most of the day and then they come home to your spouse or another relative until you get home. Like, everybody has a different situation. So it's really going to be hard to say, okay, do X, Y, Z, and then, you'll be good to go. So you kind of have to feel out your own personal situation. Some suggestions that I can offer to try if you're not sure where to begin would be to set a time limit on it. And let's say just arbitrarily that time limit is an hour a day. Then perhaps you actually set a timer so that you don't forget and so that your child has something to kind of pay attention to and to listen for, to know that that hour is up. And then when the hour is over, it's not you coming after them saying, okay, hand over the screen, your hour is over, which could incite a bit of a battle. But instead it's like, okay, well, the timer says that its screen time is over, and so we're gonna go plug it in now. And I know that even doing that, some children are still going to put up a fight about it. They're still going to get upset and not want to turn the screen off. And that's something that you're just going to have to figure out and kind of go with the flow as it happens and as your child learns what this new process looks like. And I'm suggesting this from personal experience because I have used this strategy with my daughter successfully. It does help to make sure that those time limits are staying in place, but I also have seen how she has reacted to the fact that the time is up, even if it's the timer saying it. And it just comes down to you being consistent at that point and using your positive discipline strategies to help her process her emotions about what's going on, or process his emotions about what's going on. And just, being there for them because they're upset about it. They're entitled to have that opinion, but they still need to know that that limit is going to remain in place regardless. So that's a strategy that I would suggest trying for younger children. Again, my daughter is 3.5 and we've been using this strategy with her since she was about I would say about 2 when she really started having screen time. But for slightly older children, I would say you could try the timer strategy, but depending on their age, it might be more effective to actually sit down and involve them in the decision-making process. To sit down and have a conversation about screen time and what your concerns are, what you're comfortable with allowing them to have, and then letting them weigh in on it, giving them a chance to voice their opinion and help define what their screen time is going to look like and how it is going to end, so that you're all on the same page. And then you're much less likely to run into pushback about it. So for example, your child might decide they only have screen time during a certain allotted period during the day when they're home after school, like for, you know, an hour or 2 right when they get home, and then that's it, the screen is off. Or they might decide that they're okay with the timer strategy and that they're just gonna allow themselves to have the screen time whenever, as long as it's just the allotted amount of time. Or you might be pleasantly surprised and your child actually suggests to you that they're okay with not having screen time on school days, but perhaps maybe just on the weekend or during extended school vacations, they do have screen time, and then there are set hours for it during those times. And for an older child, like going into the teen years, you might even decide with your child to give them all of the responsibility and to just check in with them periodically so that you know what types of social media they're consuming and what types of, you know, video content they're watching and things like that, just so that you kind of have a general bearing on what's going on, but really they're learning how to use it responsibly on their own. And then the last area that I really think needs to be considered in terms of a Montessori environment and where screen time fits in is what type of content your child is consuming. So if they're primarily consuming videos, then I would say that you really want to focus on making sure that they're watching shows and movies that involve as much reality as possible and as little violence as possible. You want to really ground them with good moral character, good social values, and you want to provide them with information about the real world. And this becomes more and more important the younger they are. As your child does get a little bit older, you know, once they've hit like 6, 7 years old, they're in elementary school, they are fully capable of consuming things that have more of a fantasy basis, because at that point they're like developmentally ready for that type of content. They can understand it, they realize that it is not reality, and so I would say it's more appropriate at that age. But if we're talking about your older toddler or your preschooler, you definitely want to know what it is that they're watching. You do not want to just give them your iPad, turn on YouTube, and walk away, because there are so many things that they could come across in the app that is not appropriate for them. There's the suggested videos on the side, there's ads, and even if you give them YouTube Kids to watch, I know for certain from firsthand experience, the one time this ever happened to me, it went from something that I approved of my daughter watching to the next video in line was some weird like toy unboxing video that I was not okay with her watching at all. I heard it over the counter of my kitchen. She was sitting on the couch and I was like, "What are you watching?" And I wandered over and looked and I was like, "Oh, no, you're not watching this." And I definitely was like, that's the last time that's ever happening. And a toy unboxing video might seem innocent enough to you, but if you really think about it, I mean, what is it teaching your child? It's not really teaching them anything besides reinforcing this consumer-driven world that we live in that teaches young children that they need all of these things that they're seeing other kids playing with on the screen, as opposed to them being happy with the things that they have already in their environments. So I would suggest choosing some shows ahead of time and watching an episode or 2. This way you know what kinds of things it's going to be teaching your child, because they are going to be learning from the things that they're watching, and you're gonna see what they're learning play out in their normal everyday play when they're not on the screens. So you want to make sure that it's something that's appropriate and that does not include violent scenes and drugs and sex and things that, you know, you don't want your young child exposed to. I am often asked for very specific recommendations for shows for children of like the older toddlers, preschool age group to watch, because you guys know that my daughter has screen time and that's her age group. And I really hesitate to give specific recommendations often, because it really depends on A, your child's interests, and B, what you are really comfortable with them watching. But with that said, if you're just looking for a couple of ideas to get you started, the first show that I ever showed her was Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. And I really like that show because I think that it teaches a lot of really good social emotional values and the vocabulary that goes along with it for talking about your feelings. And I have seen that play out in how she interacts with myself and my husband and her little sister. She's actually learned a lot of really good things watching that show, and I would definitely recommend that one if you're kind of just starting out and don't know where to go. Now, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is not exactly reality based because it involves talking animals, and that's not exactly very Montessori aligned. But again, given all of the other pros about the show that I really like about it, I'm okay with her watching it still, even knowing that. Now, I do try to steer her toward more reality-based shows. I have actually tried to sit down and watch like National Geographic type stuff with her in the past, but she's just at her age right now, she's not really into it. Like, I don't think she 100% follows what's going on in the show with the narrator. It just doesn't really captivate her interest the way some of these other shows do. And so I've kind of given up on that end of things. That's my personal decision, and I'm just allowing her to watch what it is that she finds interesting, so long as I've watched it with her and I'm okay with the content that she's consuming. A few other shows that she really enjoys, just to give you some other ideas, are all of these little Amazon original series shows, because her screen time is primarily on a Kindle Fire Kids Edition tablet. And so she really enjoys this show called Leo the Wildlife Ranger, which actually is reality based, and I really liked that one. Also Tumbleleaf and Stinky and Dirty, which both are targeted toward preschoolers as well. And even though they are like animated and definitely very fantasy based type shows, they all have a really good like moral value or something that teaches them a little bit about science and physics along the way, like in each episode. And so I find that they do have some educational value, and I have no problem with her watching them. And now that she's getting a little bit older, I'm also seeing her start to lean toward some of the more like nature-based type shows. Again, not 100% full on into Nat Geo stuff yet, but the Wild Kratts show is something that she really likes, which is actually part realistic with, you know, talking about animals and things like that with real people, and then it is also part animated. So it's kind of actually a good bridge, I think, between the cartoon stuff and the reality-based stuff, and she watches that one all the time and constantly comes back and tells me all of these really cool facts about animals that I didn't even know. So she's definitely learning things from that show. So moving on from all of that, I know that there are some people who ask about games. I don't really have any specific recommendations for games to give you at all. I know that games can be very addictive in nature, you know, because typically children are working for a reward of some kind, and they're getting like constant feedback on their performance as they're playing games. And Kylie has dabbled in games every now and again, but she primarily watches shows during her screen time. So I don't really have anything to say about games given my child's current age, and I'm so sorry if you were hoping for information about that. But what I would have to say, just kind of generally speaking, is to stick with the same ideas. Whatever type of content you're allowing in your child's video watching time, I would kind of try to stick to those same guidelines for whatever types of games they're playing. And again, you're the parent. If at any point you see your child playing something that you are not okay with them playing, then, you know, stop it in its tracks right then and there and don't allow it. And one last thing that I have to mention, it's so important, and I probably should have put this at the beginning of the video, but it only just dawned on me that I haven't talked about it yet, is that modeling is so important. I think about this all the time. You know, you cannot sit there and say, you can't have any screen time while your child sees you on your phone 24/7. I don't think that that's fair, and your child is certainly not going to see it as fair. They're gonna think to themselves, well, if I can't have screen time, why do you get to be on this thing 24/7? And so it becomes really important that if your child is going to have limited screen time, then it should be the same for you, especially when they're very little and they're still learning about all of this. They should see you limiting your own screen time as well. So you might need to take a step back before you put put any guidelines in place at all and reassess your own use of screens and maybe establish some screen-free hours during the day, or maybe you really try to do most of your work in the morning or in the evening before your child is awake or after they've gone to bed. Like, you really need to think about what your child is seeing as far as your engagement with screens, because that's really going to impact what their ideas are about screen time. All right, so I think those are all the things that I really felt were important to touch on as far as how you might figure screen time into your child's Montessori environment if that is something that you are choosing to do, and also 100% respecting if that is not a choice that you're making for your family. Again, I think everybody has to do what's best for their child, what they feel is best for their personal situation, and I don't think that anybody should feel guilty for allowing a little bit of screen time in their child's day, so long as they're being responsible with it and they're making sure that their child is learning to be responsible with it. And if you are interested in learning more about how to implement Montessori at home with your children, I also offer a comprehensive e-course that walks you through it step by step. So I will leave a link in the description box down below to that, just in case you are interested in learning more about it. And finally, just in case you are new to my channel, I also wanted to let you know that this video is actually part of a much larger series on this YouTube channel called Montessori at Home, which is aimed at providing practical tips and advice for busy parents like you and I for implementing Montessori at home with your children. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in watching more of, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I do upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you next time.